All right, time to give us a scoop.
I see what you did there.
I was tracking that as well. I like my
good.
ice cream puns.
Yeah. All right, so you're good?
Yep.
All right, so Mark, what does this store have to do with you running for governor?
this is my ice cream store. All my kids have worked here. The youngest of our 6 kids, Penelope, will actually start here this summer, but it's been nice from that aspect. But this is where you can get signs. So we tell our campaign supporters, Ben & Jerry's open every day from noon to 9 in Issaquah, and if you want a sign, come by. And we have signs here, and it's better than them knocking on the door at my house at random hours, so it works out really nice.
How does this frame your perspective on running for the highest office in the state?
My common thread when I go to an annual meeting for Ben & Jerry's with other franchise owners, the common thread is we all hate wasting money. Like, small business owners just simply can't afford to waste money. And I think that's the mentality we need in the governor's office, is this mentality that we're going to quit wasting money. And I think when you have that perspective, our state agencies will be a lot more productive, and we can actually get more stuff done with our current tax dollars as opposed to asking for more tax dollars.
So you've got a website which lays out your priorities, but at KOMO we have a franchise called 4 for 24. So what are your top 4 priorities as you run for governor?
First one is affordability. We have to figure out how to make our state affordable. Like, I'm at the point in my life where our oldest daughter's a junior up at Western in Bellingham, and she finishes school next year, and my wife and I have anxiety. She can actually afford to live here. The second focus for me is really around public safety, like being intellectually honest about the things where we have to do better as Democrats, and public safety is top of that list. And the state can be a better financial partner with cities and counties and the public safety front. The third comes back to jobs. Like, this is why I think it's nice to be a small business owner. Like, I look at the vacancy rate in downtown Seattle right now of office buildings. We're going to want a governor that can actually go in and recruit businesses to come to our state, and I think it's hard to do that if you have a track record of suing businesses. I think I can be successful at doing that because I have a track record of supporting the business community. And the final one is our public schools. You know, my wife's an elementary school teacher in Issaquah. All 6 of our kids have gone through the public school system here. The public school system has to work. Like, it has to be top notch. I think there's a lot of room for improvement still. We've thrown billions of dollars in the public school system. Now it's actually making sure we're getting results for all that money we've invested, and that's why I think we need a change in leadership.
How do you fix public safety? One of your opponents, Bob Ferguson, is saying $100 million and we'll hire a bunch of people and we'll do all these things. How do you fix public safety?
So I spent a lot of time focusing on our cannabis tax revenue. We get roughly $480 million a year in cannabis tax revenue. I think we should be pushing that out at the local level to both cities and counties. And I'm a big fan of secure substance abuse treatment facilities. Like, I think that's our missing link right now in the state of Washington is our substance abuse treatment facilities. The front door is always open. I think if you're using drugs in public, I don't want you to go to jail for a year, but I do want you to get treatment, and I don't want the front door of that facility to be open. I want it to be locked, so you're in there for 30 or 45 or 60 days. I want you to have the best chance possible to actually beat your addiction. And I think if the state steps up financially to make sure we have that option, you will start to see huge improvements on the public safety front all across our state.
You've been in the legislature. Why hasn't that happened?
You know, the governor has a lot of power, and so he has his priorities right now of where he wants to spend his money. My priorities would be different, and I think that's what's really important is you have to get both the House, the Senate, and the governor's office to sign off. The veto pen is very powerful, and Governor Inslee has made it very clear where his priorities are, and that hasn't been on the public safety front.
It doesn't seem like anybody who's been running for office and the current governor has really put transportation at the top. There's been polling, and you know this, every year at the start of the legislative session about what's the biggest issue for people. 5-6 years ago, it was transportation. Now it's further down the list. Homelessness is the top issue for a lot of voters. But in terms of transportation, there is an issue with the ferry system where the ferry leaders and elected leaders say there is going to be no quick fix, that it's going to be a problem for a few years. For a lot of people, that's not good enough. How do you fix the ferry system if you're governor?
This is where I have been critical of Governor Inslee. I feel like he was the one demanding that we switch from our traditional ferries to hybrid electric, which I think would have been fine if Vigor, the local shipyard that was building our ferries, could have done it. But once we realized that Vigor wasn't able to do that, I really wish Governor Inslee had pivoted to say, okay, well, let's right-size the fleet first, That's the key. And in terms of now, if you're looking at taking existing ferries and making them hybrid electric, like I would put a pause button on trying to convert any existing ferry to hybrid electric until we have additional boats in the water. And to me, I've been very clear my entire time, you can't, I drive an electric car to and from Olympia. I know climate change is real, I believe in it, but I also talk to people who live and rely upon our ferry system, and it's not fair for them to miss their doctor appointments because we don't have boats in the water. And if it's quicker to get diesel boats in the water, then let's do the diesel boats. I know Governor Inslee right now feels that based on the current state, we can't get them any quicker than 2028. And if that ends up being the case, like you have to at least get the staffing right. You have to make sure that you have enough redundant staffing so you're never canceling any routes because somebody calls off work.
That's been a problem as well. You can't hire people fast enough to staff these things. How do you change that?
Once again, this is what I think makes me different than Bob Ferguson. I've been pretty open, of saying, hey, during the pandemic, as a senator, I was allowed to go to work every day by taking a COVID test to prove I was negative. I took one on Monday, I took one on Thursday. I was really frustrated during the pandemic. I felt we could have done the exact same thing for our ferry workers to said, hey, they're essential workers to make sure this works. And as long as they're willing to take a test twice a week to prove they're negative, they shouldn't have been fired. And so I think we've created a lot of our own misery here based on decisions made in the governor's office. This is why I'm running. We need a change in how we make decisions in the governor's office if we want our state to work better.
So you think those staffing issues are still related to what happened in 2020, 2021?
We're still digging ourselves out of this hole. It was a hole we didn't have to be in. Like, it was a hole that was created by Governor Inslee because he refused to let people test. He did the mandate, and we ended up losing a lot of staff that we haven't been able to replace.
As far as electric vehicles, since you just said you drive one, the governor just had a press conference last week about further incentives for EVs and trying to get more people to buy them. It seems like, though, consumers have kind of plateaued on their interest with buying electric vehicles right now. What more can possibly be done to encourage people to jump in to an electric vehicle, given that we know there's issues with charge anxiety and battery anxiety?
The more charging stations, the better. And they have to be the ones where you can charge quickly. So I think the more the state invests where you can just get off basically at every freeway exit and feel like most freeway exits, you can probably fill up your gas tank. We need to get to that same level of reliability where pretty much every freeway exit, there's going to be a charging station there where you can charge your car in a reasonable amount of time. Like, we're talking like 30, 45 minutes. And so to me, there is room for improvement there. I think I'm a little bit more open-minded to the fact that hybrids, especially plug-in hybrids, are probably going to be part of this transition. And I think we just have to kind of embrace everything. We can't just say it all has to be 100% electric. I think the plug-in hybrid is actually a really good option where you're on battery for that first 40 or 50 miles and then you transition to gas, and that enables people to still do long road trips, but they're really not hurting the environment in their daily commute.
But as far as hurting the environment, a lot of talk about the Climate Act. You're on record on the 3 initiatives that are going to be on the ballot in November. You would vote for them, including repealing the Climate Act.
My record lines up exactly with how I voted in the Senate, which is I opposed the long-term care payroll tax, never thought it was a good tax, never thought our state could afford it. I was really frustrated. I voted against the capital gains tax because we had the largest budget surplus in the history of our state, $8 billion. And I said, I will support the capital gains tax if we're going to reduce another tax. Like, if we were going to take away sales tax on clothing, that was interesting to me. If we're going to lower property taxes, that was interesting to me. The Climate Commitment Act is the one initiative that I'm not supporting. And the reason is really important. The governor's office has been given tremendous authority of where the price of gas is with the Climate Commitment Act. And this has been my super vocal frustration with Governor Inslee is he's taken these climate auctions and he has one goal: drive up the price of the auctions as high as possible to get as much money in the door as he can. That money is coming from the people who can least afford to pay it. That's from a person who has to live in Puyallup because that's the only place they can afford, and then drives an hour to work in Seattle. As governor, I will have the exact opposite of approach. Like, I know as the chair of the capital budget, we can fight climate change without having the highest gas prices in the country. My focus as governor is make sure the climate auctions are as low as possible so we still have money coming in to fight climate change, but we're not making it unaffordable for average working families to stay and live here.
So to clarify, you're not voting for the repeal of that act?
I'm not. On the Climate Commitment Act, no.
But if you're elected governor, you would be interested in doing something different with that
Completely different. And I've actually dropped bills to propose what I would do of course, Governor Inslee said he would veto that because he doesn't have any interest in having a more balanced approach in terms of, I think it's a false choice to say anyone complaining about the price of gas doesn't care about climate change. I know a lot of people that care about climate change, but also care about the price of gas. And that's the balance we need to get right. We need to get away from this all or nothing approach that we've seen from the current administration and go back to something more balanced.
So you're clearly trying to carve out this middle lane. We talked with Dave Reichert as well, who's trying to carve out a middle lane. Are there enough Democrats who are willing to drive down this, to continue on with this metaphor about driving? Are there enough Democrats, do you think, are willing to drive down this middle lane?
There's a lot of Democrats. I mean, you've seen it in every poll, I think. 2/3 of the state wants somebody besides Bob Ferguson, and the winner of every poll right now is the undecided. So I don't know where that candidate is right now, but that's why we're optimistic. And you're right. I am proud to be a moderate in this race, but that's the thing. It's like on the Republican side, if you're anti-choice and you're not supporting marriage equality, you're not a moderate. I mean, that's the simple reality. You're not a moderate in the state of Washington when you're on the wrong side of those issues. And I've been on the right side of women's reproductive rights, the right side of marriage equality, my entire time in public office in the state of Washington. And that's why I say, yes, I don't vote for unnecessary tax increases, but when it comes to those social values that are so important to the majority of Washington residents, I have a proven track record of being on the right side of those issues and fighting for those issues. I have 4 daughters here. I never do anything to take away women's reproductive rights. I want them, to have that choice their entire life, but I also acknowledge that women's reproductive rights aren't great for my daughters. They can't afford to live in the state where my wife and I were both born and raised. This is the balance we have to get right. Save those social values, but make our state affordable, invest in public safety so our state is also safe.
Dave Reichert, again, trying to occupy this middle lane, has said that in his mind, abortion has already been decided by the voters of Washington state, that there's nothing that he could do as a governor to change abortion laws in Washington state. Do you believe that to be the case as somebody who could be elected governor, that there's nothing you could do to change the law in Washington state?
So this is the analogy I like to make is think about Idaho. Do you think someone in Idaho is going to be elected governor of Idaho if they are opposed to the Second Amendment? The answer is no. They will never be elected governor of Idaho if they're opposed to the Second Amendment. It's not because as governor they could undo anything. It's because people don't want to vote for someone as governor who has the wrong side of a value that they care deeply about. And this is what I think Dave Reichert is not understanding. You could say in Idaho the exact same thing. Oh, it doesn't matter they want to get rid of the Second Amendment. The legislature will never let them do that. That's not the point. The point is when your values don't line up with the majority of voters, you can't get elected in the state of Washington. You can't get elected in any state for that matter when that's the case. And that's why I think it really matters to have a candidate whose values actually do line up with the majority of the residents here.
The issues with fentanyl, homelessness, again, as I told you, this seems to be the issue for a lot of voters, whether they're in Western Washington, Central Washington, or Eastern Washington. They've only increased while you've been in the state Senate. The same argument could be made about Bob as Attorney General. So for the people who view him as status quo and are frustrated by these issues, how should anybody look at you and say, hey, how would it be any different? You've been in the state Senate while these problems have increased.
So this is what I think is really important. This is why we're excited about the next few months. We think as voters get educated, this is all going to work in our favor because the Supreme Court, through a decision called the Blake decision, legalized possession of drugs in the state of Washington 3 years ago. In 2021, our Supreme Court legalized possession of fentanyl in public places. Attorney General Bob Ferguson was the one urging the legislature to follow the path of Oregon and decriminalize possession of drugs like meth, fentanyl, heroin. I was a Democratic state senator that came out the day after that Supreme Court decision and said, I'm dropping a bill to make sure that does not happen in the state of Washington. I have been fighting to make sure we have accountability for public drug use ever since the Blake decision came down in 2021. The person I have been fighting is Attorney General Bob Ferguson. He wanted to go the opposite way. I won the fight. I co-sponsored the bill that we passed last year, Senate Bill 5536, to make sure we have a gross misdemeanor. I actually worked with Republicans and Democrats to get a proposal that is treatment focused and has accountability for public drug use. As voters learn where Attorney General Ferguson and I were on the most important public safety issue facing our state over the last 5 or 6 years, it works in my favor. This is why we're optimistic as we head into primary season.
You believe that's the biggest difference between the two of you?
That and the fact that I have never seen, the entire time Bob Ferguson's been there, come out against any tax proposal in Olympia. I've been the first Democrat to say I'm not voting for unnecessary tax increases. And I'm not adversarial to the business community. I myself am a small business owner. We're sitting in one of my businesses right now. I look for ways to support the business community while A.G. Ferguson is trying to find ways to sue the business community. The differences between Attorney General Ferguson and myself are about as big as you can find in the Democratic tent. And I'm optimistic as voters see what the choice is between those two different Democrats, because the governor of the state is going to be a Democrat this year. We are a blue state that's going to vote for a Democrat, and I think people will say, hey, I want to make sure I have a Democrat who's got a better balanced approach on these issues.
On homelessness, since you said under the same tent, segue here, this is the most complex issue of our times. It was before the pandemic. It is almost in a way morphed into a different zone, though, in the course of the last couple of years with fentanyl. And the question is, how do you fix it? What's the one great idea for fixing homelessness? Because I've heard from Dave Reichert, hey, let's open up McNeil Island as a potential option for turning it into a homeless shelter. Some people say more shelter is needed, more housing is needed, more drug treatment's needed. It's extremely complex, but what's the one great idea for how to fix what, for a lot of people, is the biggest issue in the state?
I mean, first off, as the chair of the state construction budget, I've been to McNeil Island recently, just like in the last year or two. That's the worst place you ever want to put anybody. I mean, it's a ferry system that has no capacity coming out of Steilacoom. And if you've been on that island lately, you would never be suggesting that that's a place anybody should go. So that, I think, that idea should be dead on arrival. But we go back to the secure substance abuse treatment facilities, I think are really important, because you have, part of the homeless challenge is, I think, people have a drug addiction. I think the second place is we've done great tribal partnerships to figure out ways to expand behavioral health access. So that's mental health and substance abuse treatment access through our tribal partners. And these facilities are open to everybody. They're not just open to tribal members, they're open to every resident in the state of Washington. And it draws down way more federal dollars than we ever get through our Medicaid reimbursement. So I think that's another important approach. I think the third one that's really important that I don't think we talk enough about is blue states have made it too difficult to build the things that we need to build. As the chair of our state construction budget, I've had a front row seat for the last decade trying to get a building permit in the state of Washington. It is not quick, it's not predictable, and what we end up doing is driving up costs unnecessarily to the point where you can no longer build something here that is affordable. And this is why we have to have a much better balanced approach of saying, hey, the permit process shouldn't be just to delay and drive up costs. It should be to have predictability, so we have consistency no matter where you are in the state, that, hey, I want to build X. We're going to make it quick and predictable for you to do that. And I think you can actually drive down the cost of building housing substantially in the state of Washington if we have a better approach of how we manage our own permit system.
Do you think the state has a handle on the roadside freeway encampments yet? They continue to pop up. It continues to be a problem. It continues to be a public safety problem.
I think you have to keep fighting them. You can't allow that to happen. So there's no scenario we can just sit back and say, hey, we're going to let that happen. And so I think you have to keep pushing back. And I'm optimistic. You know, I think some of these other approaches that I've heard, sometimes you travel around the state, like Wenatchee, I think, did a smart approach where they bought a lot. People were living in RVs or in cars. They said, hey, we don't want you right here on the street, but you can go to this lot where we do have toilets and we will have garbage service. And you know what? People went. And so some of our own towns are coming up, I think, with pretty creative solutions of ways you can move the needle. I'm not saying it's going to solve all the problems, but I'm always going to make sure, I don't care if it's coming from a Republican mayor or a Democratic mayor, all ideas are good ideas if they're helping us go in the right direction.
You're trying to carve out this lane as a moderate. You've said how you're different than Bob Ferguson. You said how you're different than Dave Reichert. The polling suggests those two guys are leading. Not everybody believes polls, but I know people pay attention to them. You've been in the single digits in these polls. Does that discourage you as you move forward here?
So we're not discouraged at all. Like I said, I think that, first off, I think we saw the state Republican convention that there is a divide on the Republican side between the Trump wing of the party and the non-Trump wing of the party. So that division is happening. We haven't had any polls that have occurred since the state Republican convention happened. Second, we just started our communication with voters. Like, You know, the TV ad from our campaign just went live last week. And so we make pretty clear in that ad that, hey, we're trying to go a different route. We're not the status quo candidate. We're not the establishment candidate. We are the candidate who wants to see change, because I'm 100% convinced our state has not achieved its full potential. And we can achieve that potential, but we need to have a change in leadership in the governor's office. As voters, I think, understand where their choices are, you're going to see those numbers fundamentally shift in the next 2 or 3 months. And that's why we're really optimistic, and that's why the undecided voter, that number is going to go down. And we think as that number goes down, they're going to gravitate to someone who isn't extreme left or extreme right, but somebody who's saying, hey, I can work with Democrats and Republicans to get stuff done for Eastern West Washington and Western Washington. And that's my track record in Olympia. That's what I'll bring to the governor's office. And I'm excited for the next few months.